This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Undistracted. I'm your host, Laura Bennett, and this is the podcast where we learn from our guests about how to be better at building our lives with intention around our passions, our purpose, and dealing with some of the stuff that gets in the way of that. If you're single or have single friends, this episode is for you. Today we welcome back Debra Fileta, a licensed counsellor specialising in dating, marriage and relationship issues, along with a spectrum of mental health disorders and challenges. She's authored many books, including True Love Dates, Are You Really Okay? And her latest, Soul Care. Pulling from Jesus' own life rhythms, Soul Care guides us to true health and rest. And as a single gal myself, I wondered how we can look after our souls when you face rejection, get caught up caring for people you date, or struggle with varying definitions of healthy intimacy you can encounter along the way. Let's welcome Debra back to the show. Debra, what's the difference between soul care and self-care?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important that we learn to get this right as singles. And I think we don't even realize the level of our capacity oftentimes until we're in relationships and we're having to pour out, and then we have an awareness of it. So if we could really get our minds wrapped around this concept of I have a capacity and my fullness matters because I pour out of my fullness, not out of my emptiness. If we could get this right as a single person, we're going to be so ahead of the game when we enter marriage or enter relationship where we are having to pour out frequently and regularly and make sure that we stay filled as well. So let's talk about the difference between self-care and soul care. A lot of people, particularly Christians, really struggle with the concept of self-care. A lot of people think it's selfish or wrong, or it's just not what God calls us to. We're supposed to be people that focus on everybody else. And then add to that, sometimes not only is our theology wrong, but also what we've learned in our family of origin perpetuates that belief of you're supposed to just think of everybody else at the neglect of yourself, at the neglect of your own needs. And it's easy to see why so many people do struggle with this concept. And then we also have a false definition of self-care versus soul care. Self-care to me are these superficial actions that we take to address a pain point in our life. So maybe I'm feeling really stressed out after a long day. So what do? I decide to take a hot bath to relax, or I go on a little bit of a walk, or I'll pick up a book and read it. That's great. That's addressing a pain point. But the problem is it's superficial. It's not long lasting because it's not focused on alleviating the problem. It's focused on just fixing the problem. And so tomorrow the problem can come back and I feel stressed again. And now I need to find something to deal with that pain point. That's self-care. Soul care is different. It's deeper. It's long-lasting rhythms. It's getting to the question of, well, why do I feel empty and burnt out all the time? Why am I struggling? It's filling me up with long-lasting rhythms rather than these one-time superficial actions that reset the next day. And I believe that God wants us to practice soul care. And I believe that's true because I believe that Jesus modeled soul care. He was the ultimate at soul care and staying filled so that he could pour out.
And in the world of dating, one of the ways that people say to look after yourself, or, it probably does sit more in that self-care thing. If you've had a bad date or if you've had a breakup, whatever, it's go on the next date, go find the next nice guy, the next nice girl. Do you think that helps when we're feeling a little bit, sad about a situation or like something didn't work out? Is it just get back on the horse and go find that next date? Or is that a little bit unhelpful?
Well, I would say this. When you feel hurt, when you feel hopeless, when you feel rejected, when you feel desperate, those are important signals. And instead of just plowing through and moving on to the next thing or numbing that feeling with something else, one of the rhythms of soul care is actually the rhythm of tuning in. Tune in to what your emotions are telling you and respond in healthy ways because your emotions are a built in SOS signal that God gave you to help course correct and to help guide you and lead you. And so it's when I have this feeling, I can respond to the feeling by doing the next thing, the next desperate thing, numbing it, eating ice cream, drinking alcohol, going on new dates, just trying to block out the feeling. Or I can feel the feeling and see it as a signal that God is asking me to respond to in a healthy way and address. And I think we do that with all areas of life, not just bad dates, but think about anytime we have an uncomfortable feeling, how quickly we want to get rid of it rather than see it as a signal that's meant to be responded to.
How does Jesus model soul care to us?
Well, I would say in so many ways, but Jesus honored his capacity. Jesus was fully God, yet fully man, and he knew that he had human capacity. And he honored that human capacity. He chose to honor the limitations of his human body and realize his need for filling so that he could pour out in the way that God asked him to. We can't pour out if we're empty. And soul care is based on the six rhythms that I believe Jesus practiced to care for his soul, from physical rhythms such as nourish, which focuses on your physical body, of hydration and nutrition and movement, all the way to the sixth rhythm, which is tune in, which talks about being aware of your emotions and what's going on underneath the surface of your life. But Jesus was so good at modeling these things. It was such a fun book to write because I got to see Jesus through the lens of soul care. And I've never really looked at the Gospels in that lens. And so many things stuck out to me. I've read the Gospels so many times, but so many new things stuck out to me when I read through the lens of how did Jesus stay filled.
And I mean, there is something quite profound to think that he achieved his complete divine purpose within the limitations of humanity. Like that, I feel like that gives us all something to work with.
Totally. Totally. Like there's hope for us to be able to do this well. And we have a guide. We have Jesus who modeled these practical things. Sometimes we look at Jesus of like, oh, he was so perfect and this like high level, but I think if anything, he's a guide of like this is how you live life in a balanced, healthy way.
And we hear a lot about the fact that Jesus did take the time to get away to the garden, get away into quiet places and pray. We love the scriptures that talk about how he was asleep on the boat, that Jesus had naps and that kind of thing. Is it as simple as those two qualities about Jesus, or is there more to the way he lived his life that stood out to you?
There's so much more. I think even the rhythm of nourish was an eye opener for me to think of Jesus practicing the caring of his body is bizarre. It's like, do you think about Jesus thinking, oh, I should hydrate? Or, oh, it's time to stop and fuel my body. And so should you, disciples. Come and eat some breakfast. Stop. He often said, it's let's go get some food. You go get some food. Go to the town and get some food. Feed these people, right? Like he was so aware of physical needs because this temple is all we've got to do what God has called us to do. So we have to stay attuned to our physical needs and meet those needs in healthy ways. Jesus was attuned to the nutrition his body needed. He was in tune to hydration. Drinking water is so underestimated and undervalued in our culture. We neglect our bodies. We don't take a sip of water till the end of the day, and then we're irritable, we're annoyed, we have a headache, we're tired and we're like, this is spiritual warfare. When it might not be a demon, you just might be dehydrated and you need to take care of your physical body. How can we go to Judea and Samaria and the ends of the earth when we've neglected to care for our physical body? Not only that, but Jesus practiced movement. There's a whole chapter in soul care under that nourish rhythm about movement and the importance of movement and exercise and what it does for our neurotransmitters. It's like a 20-minute brisk walk is parallel to taking an antidepressant and how it affects your serotonin and dopamine levels. Did you know that Jesus walked about 40,000 steps a day?
Wow.
I mean, that blows my 10,000 step goal
Yeah.
out of the water. 40,000 steps a day. And if you just think about the basics, these things, these basic temple things, our human temple that affects our brain health, that affects the rest of our life. There's so many things that are just so basic that Jesus himself honored. How much more do we need to honor our human temple? So there's nourish, there's rest, there's connect, there's protect, which is the rhythm of boundaries. There's the rhythm of savor, which is my favorite about being in tune to life, being present, being mindful in the here and now, and not being distracted by the past or the future or my phone. Like so many of us aren't present. Jesus practiced being present. Jesus practiced tuning in. There were so many different rhythms that he practiced in his life, and that's what kept him balanced and calibrated it in a healthy way. And so it's just amazing. And it's just such a reminder that this is not a luxury for us. This is a necessity.
And there's so much in what you're saying there, but I want to really highlight the point about the over spiritualization of things, particularly for those listening who have been single for a while. If you're finding yourself single again, and I can speak for myself here and my friends, you find a lot of people over spiritualizing, I think, this single season, that it's it's God's teaching me something, or it's because of this particular like spiritual wrestle that you haven't found your partner yet, that if you just deal with this particular thing, then God will open this door, etc., etc. The list can go on. How do we know if we're over spiritualizing the reasons behind why we might be single, or whether we're actually on to something, that there is some kind of spiritual effect, I suppose, within what's happening in this waiting window?
I think we start by doing what is in our power to do and acknowledging that what is not in our power is in God's hands. The problem is so many times we don't even do what's in our power to do. So something as basic as taking a drink of water, that's in my power. Something as basic as joining a singles group, that's in my power. I can do what's in my power to do. And if I'm not doing what's in my power to do, there's a good chance I'm over spiritualizing things. You can't do everything and you can't control the outcome, but what's a step that's in your power to do? And are you being responsible to the things that are within your reach? And I think that's where so many singles get stuck. It's like they're looking at the big picture spiritually, which is so important. But there's practical things that are in our power and control to do that so many people don't do. It's going to be really hard to find a spouse and have a decent dating life when you're spending 23 of 24 hours cooped up in your house, like very practical things that we often aren't engaging in to the best of our ability.
And there's a lot of pain points for people that can have themselves in that reality, right? Where it's like, if you're somebody who has any kind of social anxiety, if you've put yourself out there before and something went wrong, the desire to just want to stay at home and be like, Jesus, bring them to me, that can be very understandable. How do you start to move out of that? If that is your experience, how do you say, yeah, I kind of do need to take some action steps here?
I think the number one word that I would use to describe health in general, emotional health, spiritual health, mental health, is the word ownership. Like, what's mine for me to own? Our journey of life and healing and even accomplishing God's will is a partnership with God. It's not us down our own path, and it's not God just doing it all for us. It's a partnership. When Jesus says to the paralytic, "Do you want to be healed?" There's a question there, and you have to answer it. And then the paralytic says, "Yes." And then Jesus says, "Okay, get up, take your mat, and walk." It's like, wait a second. I am paralyzed. Do you want me to get up? Yes. There's a partnership here. It's a back and forth. Do you want to be healed? Yes. Okay, then do this. And now I have to do this. There's a partnership for us to stay in step with God and the Holy Spirit and the healing work that He wants to do in our life. We can't do it without Him, but He's not going to just do it for us while we're sitting back and living passively. Sometimes I think we falsely confuse having faith with living passively. It's like, oh, I have faith. I trust God. He's going to bring that person right to my doorstep. Well, maybe if the person is the Amazon delivery guy, but otherwise, you might actually have to do something differently in partnership, taking a step of faith in partnership that God is going to meet you and be what you need and help you with your social anxiety, with whatever it is. That step of partnership might be you getting therapy for your social anxiety so that you can be healed and uninhibited to go out and meet people and do what God has called you to do. And so it's very tricky because, knowing what my role is versus what God's role can seem so overwhelming. But I would say your role is whatever is in your power and ownership and control. What can you do? And everything you can't do, that's God's role. And that's where I leave it at His feet. And that's where I practice faith and trust.
And there's a weight that can come when you realize maybe you've been getting that wrong. I think, if you've realized that you've got to a point in life where you go, oh, maybe my approach to this has been part of what's sort of set me back. I think that can be something that requires a bit of soul care, because you suddenly see your own responsibility in a situation you thought was all like quote unquote God's fault kind of thing, or like God's delay. What do you do with that when you realize your own participation in something that has set you back?
Well, let me just tell you the parameters that I think are good to keep in mind whenever I do a dating or singles conference. Oftentimes I'll tell people that one of the ways to up your odds of finding a good match is to invest time and energy into finding a good match. Just like if you are wanting to find a job, you would not stay home and twiddle your thumbs and say, okay, I really hope I find a job and I'm just going to lay in bed and hope it happens. But at the same time, I also know that I could spend thousands of hours looking and God still has to help me find a job. So the balance is I'm not going to spend 1,000 hours, but I'm also not going to do nothing. What am I going to do? I always tell singles, consider it a part-time job. Consider it a part-time job. If you told me you were looking for a job, I would say they suggest that you spend about 15 hours a week looking for a job if you need a job. Consider it a part-time job to look for a full-time job. And I kind of like that strategy when it comes to dating and relationships. Consider it a part-time job to find a full-time partner. So maybe that means I'm reading dating books. I'm listening to podcasts to help me grow spiritually, mentally, emotionally. I'm reading some Debra Fileta books about emotional health and counseling. I'm listening to Hope Radio. I am doing the work, the education. Maybe part of those hours means you are on a dating app, or you're attending a singles event, or you're planning a singles Bible study or a singles meetup. Like, what are the hours that you are investing in trying to make connections and trying to grow that relational part of your life? And if you look back and feel this regret, like, man, I haven't done much of that, well, you can either spend your time regretting, or you can spend your time planning what you're going to do tomorrow. and setting some goals and praying about it. Even just sitting to pray about your love life to me is an investment in your love life. So what are the hours that you're putting in practically? And I would even just keep it that basic.
And I know there's some people, like what I've seen, and I can speak for the girls to some degree. I don't know what the guys' experience is like on this necessarily, but I watch a lot of my friends, and at times myself, I will admit to it, where much like anything else you're believing for in life, there feels like there's this constant kind of seesaw of, is God going to do this and I've just got to hold on and keep believing? Or is this one of those things like the situations where somebody wants a kid and it's just not going to happen? And it's like, do you accept that, hey, maybe this is just not something I'm going to have a breakthrough in? Or am I meant to keep standing and believing? That's exhausting, right? And I think you never know whether it's time to accept or time to push forward. How do we look after our souls when we're living with that tension and we don't know whether or not to let it go?
You know, I have never really felt like I've ever had to lay down a hope until I've faced an impossible moment where God is clearly saying, let down the hope. I believe if the hope is in your heart, you hold on to it until your very last breath, until that moment where God says, okay, it's time to hope for heaven. Or, okay, I mean, even look at Abraham and Sarah. She's not even ovulating anymore. And God gives them a baby. It's like, hold on to that hope until God tells you to put it down. I don't think the decision is for us to make. I think God makes it very clear when He's decided that that hope needs to be put aside. Now, that doesn't mean because I hope for something, I don't have other hopes. I hope for to be married, but I'm also doing other things while I wait. I have other hopes that I can water while I wait for this hope to grow. So I don't necessarily ever see it as a hope that you have to let die unless the Holy Spirit clearly says it's time to let this die. You hold on to that hope until the day that you die. And God changes your hopes after that point. But I really don't think that it's even a choice we have to wrestle with because we don't know what tomorrow holds. So why not hold on to that hope? As long as I'm also holding on to Jesus, I can carry them both.
And I suppose as well, like if you're able to take action steps, so if you're somebody that's taking, some degree of what we've spoken about, going on the apps, going to the singles conferences, etc., and you're taking a little bit of a break, when you kind of need it, maybe that's enough, right? To be doing something active in the direction of that hope and then trusting God whether or not you need to lay it down or not.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think sometimes people lay down the hope for a little while, but I don't even think they're actually laying down the hope as much as taking a rest to focus on other hopes. And I think that's okay. I think sometimes you just need to fill up so that you can continue to pour out in the dating world. Maybe you get burnt out. Maybe you get depleted, just like anything, just like with ministry. There's going to be a season when you get burnt out, and that's your body saying it's time to pause and fill up. And it can be the same with dating. If like I've dated and it hasn't worked out, and I'm feeling like I need to take a breather to fill up so that I can pour back out.
Yeah.
That is a very different conversation, though. That is not putting down the hope and, out of sadness and rejection and fear. It's intentionally saying, I'm going to take a break from this so that I can fill up and do it more effectively in the next season.
One thing I'm noticing in the dating world, especially, I actually don't think it matters what age you are. I just think in the current experience of dating, people are carrying a lot, like whether it is past hurts from other relationships, whether it's a variety of different kinds of sexual experiences that you suddenly have to go, oh, okay, we're dealing with this particular bucket of things and opinions and beliefs about sexuality, etc. Even in dating, it feels like there is a lot of things that you've got to be able to talk through, accept and hear out from other people. how do you look after your soul with those sorts of things? Like if somebody else that you're if you're starting to date someone, for instance, that's got some kind of sexual trauma, if you're starting to date somebody that has really different ideas about the place of intimacy in relationships, like that can be a lot that you've got to process your own beliefs about, your own attitudes toward, etc. You're almost being a counselor for somebody else. That's a lot when you're doing, regular dates. How do you look after yourself when you've got to kind of carry other people and their experiences through this time as well?
I don't know that you should be carrying other people in that way. I would say if the burden feels too heavy, it probably is. And that a healthy dating relationship is walking in sync with somebody who's already got momentum and walking in the same direction as you versus somebody that you've got to drag behind you and get them to where they need to go or where you want them to go, because that is a painful, long journey that you're going to be taking for the rest of your life if it starts in dating. So I do think that the motto of leave people better than you found them is important as far as these simple interactions of I'm going to encourage you, breathe the life into you. But if you are not moving in the direction that I'm moving, I don't think this is going to be a good fit. And being able to determine that pretty early on so that you're not doing the work for someone else that they should be doing for themselves.
So are there signals then that you would look out for to say, hey, I think you need a little bit of soul care in this? Like maybe you are carrying too much for somebody else. Maybe you are getting in too deep here.
Well, I think one of the reasons that people struggle with soul care to begin with is because of underlying beliefs that make them feel over responsible for people. I think about, the things that we carry from childhood. Maybe you're a firstborn and you're so used to filling in the gaps of responsibility and being a people pleaser. They say behind every people pleaser was once a parent pleaser. And for many firstborn children, that's kind of what you do. You fill in the gaps. You do more than your share. And then you can take that pattern into relationships. Or maybe you grew up in a family where there was a lot of high needs. Everybody had high needs, and or one person in the family had high needs that were higher than yours. Maybe there was a child who was rebellious, or maybe there was someone with a disability, or maybe there was chaos and you had to kind of put your needs on the back burner to focus on everybody else's needs and keep equilibrium in the family. Guess what? You might be the type of person who then grows up attracted to problems that need fixing or people who need helping because that's your role that you carried. So you might actually be attracted to people who are struggling because you've carried the role of being a fixer, doing more than your fair share. So some of the reasons we do some of these things in relationships actually stems back from the roles we carried in childhood, the beliefs that we carried in childhood. So even practicing healthy soul care, the people who struggle the most are the people who are so fixated on everybody else's needs and so out of tune to their own needs, their own health, their own filling. But imagine the detriment when we carry that mentality into relationships and it's so lopsided. It's easy for people like that to get into one-sided relationships where they're doing all the investing, all the work, all the communicating, all the planning. Like I'm moving this thing in the right direction, but I'm doing it by myself. If it's a heavy burden, you probably shouldn't be carrying it. There's probably a sign and a signal there. Hey, this isn't supposed to feel this heavy.
And there's a added layer, I think, in a Christian experience sometimes because we're brought up, if you've lived in the Christian world for any length of time, a lot of the language is about service and about care and about obviously, helping everyone we interact with, whether it's in a romantic relationship or otherwise, to be directed toward purpose, right? To have that connection with God, etc. How does it apply in a dating kind of setting? When you feel like service and care are really important, to set boundaries then in dating, what does that look like when you're wanting to love somebody but also look after yourself?
I do think scripture makes a point to remind us that the romantic relationship is not like the ministry relationship, which is why the Bible tells us to be equally yoked when it comes to romantic relationships versus unequally yoked. We might be unequally yoked in other relationships with people who we're doing ministry with, but when it comes to romantic relationships, the Bible talks about mutuality, mutual submission, and equal yoke. I think there's something to be said of that. And for us to look for that in our romantic relationships, because a romantic relationship is never a ministry relationship in the sense of I'm just pouring out, period. That becomes a one-sided relationship. And we're supposed to do that with the discipleship relationships that we're called to, but not in every single relationship in our life, or we would be completely drained and depleted. There has to be life-giving relationships, and especially in the context of romantic relationship. In order for a relationship to grow in a romantic context, there has to be healthy give and take.
That is so good, and I hope people really hear that a dating relationship, a romantic relationship, is not a ministry relationship. Because even if you come from the generation of like flirt to convert, right, that you can somehow kind of woo people into the Christian world with that kind of affection and care, like, you need to hear that message loud and clear.
Yeah, it's true. It's not a ministry relationship, and I'm not saying God has never worked in that context. I mean, so many people hear me say this and they're like, well, my grandma married my grandpa and he wasn't a Christian. And you know what? Thank God for his grace and mercy over that situation.
Mm.
But that is not the template to a healthy relationship. God can interrupt an unhealthy template, but we're still taking a risk by entering through an unhealthy template rather than what God has told us is healthy and good and right.
One of the most annoying things about Jesus, if I can say it, is that he didn't date. Because for those that, are in that season trying to look at Jesus for what to do or some kind of picture of how would he do this, it's not there in a literal sense. So what can we take away from Jesus' life about how to do dating when he never did?
I think it starts with the reality that you can have a full, rich, complete life as a single person. And I'm glad he didn't date because it's a reminder that my purpose and fulfillment does not come from my mate. It comes from my Savior. It's not from my soulmate, it's from my Savior. And my husband does not fulfill me, even in marriage. Like there's still a vertical context with my relationship with God that keeps me filled rather than a horizontal relationship that keeps me filled. And so I love the idea that a healthy marriage is not a necessity, but it does add to your life. It's a gift and a blessing.
Mm.
And so for us to know that I'm not in a relationship, but I want to be, there's nothing wrong with that. But you can be just as purposeful and complete and fulfilled as a single person as well. Like there's no deficit in singleness. And I think that's the beauty of Jesus not dating is like, hey, I'm complete standing alone.
Interestingly, I feel like it's the church that can perpetuate the alternative to that, that marriage is the precursor to unlocking your full potential, that marriage is that precursor to some kind of validation. Whereas culturally now, we're getting more to a point where your relationship status can be whatever it wants to be. Like, you do your thing. Is the church doing something that is hindering singles right now that you notice the most? Or is that a little bit unfair of me to say?
It's tricky because I think we can take anything and interpret it to the tone of our level of health. So when I'm struggling and I hear someone say something that can really be misconstrued, but if I'm healthy and I hear something, that same thing can be a word of encouragement. So the level to which something comes across often has to do with my own health and how I choose to interpret it. So has the church said things that have discouraged singles? Certainly, but I also think it depends on the health of the person doing the interpreting, of how they're going to receive that word or disregard that word, how they're going to interpret that word. But what I do know to be true is that God uses both the path of singleness and the path of marriage to make us more like Him. And if I'm on the path of singleness right now, I go full force in that path to become more like Jesus. If I'm in the path of marriage, I go full force to become more like Him through marriage. They're both hard in different ways. They're both a blessing in different ways. And I get to decide which course I want to take. It's a choose your own adventure to a degree. If you want to hold on to the hope of marriage, hold on to it for the rest of your life. If you've decided you want to be single, that's great too. It's really up to you which path you want to pursue by doing all that you can do along that journey and trusting God with the parts that are out of your control.
With the last couple minutes we have here, Debra, for the person listening who is in a waiting season, they do have that desire to be in a relationship, to be married one day. Where would you say that healthy soul care begins for them?
I would say seeing your job, your role, your responsibility, and being filled standing alone. Because when you're filled standing alone and you get into a relationship, you're already filled. It's like what you can give in that relationship is the overflow versus you're half filled. You get into a relationship and you're really needing them to fill you up. Then you find yourself in an unhealthy place. So, as a single person, no matter what you desire, no matter what tomorrow holds, you will not be wasting time by getting healthy standing alone, by filling up standing alone, by caring for your soul standing alone. It's not going to be in vain, because if it doesn't pour out into a romantic relationship, it will pour out to all the people in your proximity. They will all benefit from your health and wholeness. And it's also preparing you for if there comes a day when God does bring someone into your life, that you're already functioning out of a place of overflow rather than a place of emptiness.
You always bring such great wisdom to the table. It has been such a joy to talk to you, Debra. Thanks again for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Undistracted. You can rate it, review it, share it with your friends. You can find a video version of this interview on the Hope 1032 YouTube channel. And until next time, enjoy living this undistracted life.